Now we're going to do our taco shop example using position to do our layout. And here is what the taco shop looks like. Kind of made it look a little nicer. Gave it a dark border around the edge and then a nice light little dash border right here. So let's look at the code to see how do we get it to do this with position. And just because we're seeing these different ways of building the taco shop, like that doesn't mean, it's just showing you different ways you could use the different tools, different layout tools. And if I was to build the taco shop, I would first go to Flexbox, as I always go to first go to Flexbox for everything. So always go to Flexbox first, unless it's totally obvious, like, oh, this is totally what you need to use position for. Like if I want a header to always be at the top of the page, position. But anyhow, you could also do this kind of a layout with position. Let's look at the code. So here's the HTML and the body, nav, and main. So these two are like, that and that. So that's what we have. And in main, oh, that's cool. I haven't done that in a while. In main, in nav, that's what we have right there. We have a UL and all those LIs, right? So that's our nav. And then in main, we just have 3 paragraphs. I really like that. I haven't done that in a while. That's very cool. I like that about WebStorm. So let's see what is the, how's the code work? I've commented a bunch of stuff out because this is the way I like to do stuff. And there's different types of examples, different types of scenarios you could run. And what happens? I always ask myself this, what happens and how's it working? So like, I'll show you the reset thing in a second. But here is the meat of what's happening. So we have set the body to position relative and we've set the nav to position absolute. Okay, so this has position absolute, which means if something has position absolute, it's going to look up the DOM and it's going to find the next element which has position set and then position itself in relationship to that element. Or as it goes up the DOM, right, if it doesn't reach anything that has a position property set, it'll position itself off of HTML. So nav has position absolute. It's going to go up the DOM and it's going to be like, does body have position set? And it sure does. So in relationship to body, nav is going to be top 0, left 0. So here is body. Body has a black border around it, right? There's body. And it's going to be, the nav is going to be top 0, left 0. So I'm putting this right in the top left corner of body. Pretty cool. And then I'm giving it a width of 150 pixels. And I put a little comment here. Notice this, because that comment corresponds to this, notice this, right there, right? And I have margin left 150. So nav is 150. And then main has a margin left 150. What would happen if this line was not there? Right? No margin. Well, that doesn't look good, right? Because what happens is position absolute comes out of the document flow and we just position it in relationship to, that other element. And so something else could like slide right in there. So we have to manually hold that space. So by putting in margin left 150, there's a huge space there. And that huge space can be occupied by this. So even though those are in 2 different levels, so to speak, one is in the normal document flow, this one, right, including the margin over on the left. And this one is not in the normal document flow. It's like on top of stuff. They work, because there's space reserved for that. Anyhow, that's how it works. You might ask yourself, this is another really good question to ask yourself. I'm going to take the notice this out because I want to comment and uncomment this stuff. Maybe I'll put, I should do it like this. I'll put it up top. Wah, 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 wah. Wah, 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 wah. Sweet. All right, so I want to comment out this line. So we might have also said, well, why don't we just do position also on main? Like that would make sense. And we'll just position this 150 pixels off of the left. So this one is positioned, top 0, left 0 off of body. And then main is going to look up the DOM and position itself off of body because that's the next one up that has a position property set. And it's going to come off the top 0 and off the left 150. And this is 150 wide, so cool. This will be over 150. Like, I think that's totally going to work, but when I tried this a moment ago, look at what happens. Body collapses. So let me comment this back out and put it back the way it was. Whoops. Right? So body is that black border. And when I take everything out of normal document flow, there is nothing in body. So body's like, just totally collapses. So you have to understand how all of these things work and what their characteristics are. But they're just some fundamentals there to understand. If there's nothing in a block level element, then it's just going to be a very small height, and it will continue to take up as much width as possible. I'm limiting the width of body right here, max width. If I took that off, whole page, right? But, you know, the maximum width of body is right there. And then you also need to understand position absolute takes things out of the normal document flow. Remove from the normal flow of the DOM. An absolute position element is removed from the normal flow of the DOM. An absolute, so, right, it's taken out. So if there's nothing in body, collapses. So you just understand those principles. In the normal document flow, you know, space is held for it if it's in other containers. Block level elements, if there's nothing in them, they just collapse the height if you haven't set the height, but they still take up the whole row, right? So you're getting some of those things, and then you can understand, like, why is my page doing what it's doing? So I'm going to comment this out. I'll put a little comment in here. What happens if you use this instead of, I don't know. What happens if you use this instead of margin left 150 pixels? And I'm going to put that into its own deal down here just so it's kind of separate. I got to look around my mic. And we'll put that code down there. There we go. And we'll comment all of this out, and we'll comment this one back on, and we have that notice this, and I liked that better right here. So we'll put that right there, and same with this one. Cool. And then the border, I don't know if we need that 1 pix hot pink, but I put that there just so you could see, like, you know, what is the width of that nav. So that's kind of cool, but it totally doesn't make it look good, so I'm going to turn that back off. Hot pink is usually, for me, debugging. Last thing I want to point out is I have a reset here. What happens if I turn that reset on for body, nav, main, and P? Okay, so you saw that that collapsed, right? So turn it back off. Or, you know, it took out the space around there. So that is browser user agent default formatting that's occurring. So if this was production, I would want to zero that out and control that. But it starts to get like a whole lot of code as I add in that other stuff. So I want to keep the example lean for teaching. But I want to show you that, hey, don't forget about user agent default browser formatting and zero it out in production. And then make sure you style everything yourself so you know what's going on. And then this gets really trippy if I add in the unordered list and zero that out, right? So there is some formatting in a big way going on by the browser. I may or may not want to do that. You can play with that. Maybe I'll just like check browsers and see, okay, is it working on all browsers? Because you need to do that anyhow. But anyhow, that'd be something to consider. So that's the reset. And something to consider, and I'll just leave that right there. All right, so that's doing the taco shop. Let's get it back to looking nice. That's doing the taco shop with position layout, using position, the CSS position property to do our layout. Pretty cool.